Well, I can now go to the British Academy because I'm joined now by the former Prime Minister Tony Blair, who campaigned to stay in the EU during the Brexit referendum. There he is, and joins me now live. Now, if I could just ask you, Mr. Blair, first of all, for your assessment of where we are right now.
Well, it's hard to know until you see the precise terms of what's been agreed by the government, but if it's along the lines of the Chequers deal, then I think the central question will be that Britain is going to be still in the customs union to try and resolve the Northern Ireland problem, and it won't be able to get out of those arrangements without the consent of Europe. And so, in effect, I'm afraid we're going to be locked into the European trading system, having lost our control over the say in that decision-making process. So this is why, you're in a curious position now where the people who are leavers and the people like myself who are remainers are united in saying, look, this is a bad deal, and it's really not going to work. And that's why I think the only way you can resolve this issue finally is to go back to the people and say, look, you're going to have to give us a clear mandate.
But aren't you just Ramoners, because isn't the option no deal?
No, the option is not no deal. You've got various different options you could have, but the critical thing is that the option the government's gone for in this Chequers deal essentially means that we stay in a customs union until Europe agrees we can leave it, so you can't do these free trade deals. And then for the future trading arrangements, we have a common rule book with the EU, which essentially means we're still in the EU's single market for goods and agricultural products, potentially. And what that means is you've lost your say over the decision making, but you're still bound by the rules. Now, the whole purpose of Brexit, I mean, I don't agree with it, but if the whole purpose was to break free of those rules, then we're in the bizarre position where in the name of taking back control, we've actually surrendered the control we had.
So the Prime Minister was wrong when she said in the House a couple of hours ago that this is leaving the EU.
No, she's absolutely right. It's a form of Brexit, but it's a Brexit in name only. The problem is we're leaving the political structures, but we're still tied into the economic structures. What that means is the rules and regulations, the things, I mean, I don't personally object to, but the things that led people to believe that we had to get out of the European Union, we're still tied to those, but because we've left the political structures of the European Union, we've lost our seat at the decision-making table. So this literally is not the best of a bad job, I'm afraid. It's the worst of both worlds. Now, I have said throughout, and I said again today in my speech today, I am deeply sympathetic to Theresa May. She's been dealt a very poor hand. She's got a very divided party. It's an impossible circle to square. I completely sympathise. But this is not the answer. And by the way, if we go down this path, it doesn't resolve the problem. Because the people who are leavers inside her cabinet, they are going to use some of the fudged language around this to argue after we leave in March 2019 that they should reopen the whole thing. So this debate's not going to be resolved by this deal. It's going to carry on through the transition period, probably an extended transition period. I understand the desire just to take the thing off the table and do a deal at any cost, but this won't work. It won't satisfy the people who want to break free from Europe, and it won't satisfy the people like me who want to remain. The only way you're going to do this is to put it back to the people. And I know that sounds, in a way, counterintuitive. How can it possibly be right to go back to the people? It's because we've 2.5 years of experience of this. The negotiation hasn't really worked, and the people now need to decide, do you want to continue with this, or do you want to stay?
The people said what they wanted 2 years ago. Politicians are now delivering, they would argue, as best they can. Shouldn't that be enough?
Yeah, well, that's a perfectly good point, but here's the problem. As you rightly say, they've done the best they can, but the best they can doesn't really satisfy the people who wanted to leave, and obviously doesn't satisfy the people who want to remain.
But it was never going to, was it? It was always going to be about compromise, and that is the compromise that is now on the table.
Yeah, it's a compromise that's on the table, but the question is this compromise really worth the effort? If the compromise is such that you stay bound to Europe's rules in order to minimise economic damage, I get it completely, but if the whole purpose of Brexit is to be able to break free of those rules, what's the point of doing that? And the difficulty all the way through is that you've got a choice between a Brexit that's essentially pointless, which is the one Theresa May is offering, and a Brexit which is painful, which is obviously breaking out of the single market and customs union. And the reason for this is you've had 4.5 decades of British commercial, trading, investment relationships growing up on the basis we're part of this European single market, this unique trading system in which there's one set of rules and regulations. So if you're going to leave it, it's going to be painful. On the other hand, if you stay tied to it, but you get out of the political structures of decision-making, you've got a Brexit that's pointless. And that is the essential conundrum. It's not Theresa May's fault that she can't resolve it, because it's irresolvable. Unfortunately, though, the way she's chosen to resolve it, honestly, is going to satisfy no one.
And if it satisfies no one in Parliament and she loses the vote then, what's her future? What do you think should happen if she has to go?
Well, the obvious thing is for her to say, look, I've tried my best. I mean, the very point you were putting to me earlier, I've tried my best, I've done the best deal I can. OK, if you, Parliament, think it's not a good deal, and I understand the reasons for that, we've got to go back to the people and ask them, are you really, after this 2.5 years of experience, when you've seen what these negotiations look like, when you know the different parameters, when it's not claim and counterclaim, but you've actually got some reality to work on, do you want to leave? In which case, people like me, if the country votes again to leave, that's it, that's an end of the argument for this generation, we leave. Or do you want to stay? And I believe, by the way, if that happened, you would also find Europe would step forward with a different offer for Britain, because the politics of Europe in the last 2.5 years have dramatically changed. And the very anxieties that caused the British people to vote for Brexit are anxieties felt across Europe. So you could actually get to a situation where it's not a question of simply the offer that we had before versus Brexit, but actually a renewed offer which meets many of the British objections versus Brexit.
For many people, you are a divisive figure in all this. You've just described a change of mood in Europe. I'm just wondering if you could have put the clock back, your immigration policy, which many people point to as the moment the Brexit trawler, if you like, started to take off, do you regret your own policy, and do you feel in some way responsible for where we are right now?
Yeah, look, I'm prepared to be responsible for many things, but not a decision I didn't agree with and vehemently opposed. Look, if you go back to 2004, those transitional arrangements, and you could have kept restrictions on for a period of 7 years, yeah, of course the politics that developed over those years was completely different from the politics at the time of 2004, and if I'd still been in office, I would have been reacting to it. But when you look at the underlying causes of Brexit, it's about the immigration piece as a whole. And the irony is that at the very time when we have decided that we want to leave, and I think immigration played a huge role in this, the whole of the politics of immigration in Europe has also changed. So this is why, you know, many of the things that, for example, David Cameron tried to negotiate last time, I think you would be negotiating a completely different atmosphere today.
I'm just wondering, the mechanism for this vote that you say you want, this people's vote, what would that mechanism actually be? How would it work?
Well, this is a very good question, and you have to work out what exactly the question would be, and obviously you're an electoral commission that in the end can influence that or decide those things. But I think it's the real difference is this. It's whether you remain or leave, but on this occasion, you know, if there's a vote to leave, you're leaving not on the basis of this sort of half in, half out, you're voting to leave. And I think it's perfectly obvious that the true positions that command support in the country are either staying or what I would say is not a Brexit in name only, but a true proper Brexit. And that's the choice, and the British people have got to make it. And the difference, I know people say, well, won't that divide the country? The country's divided already. And the curious thing is, the biggest point of unity right now is opposition to this set of proposals. If you want to unify the country for the future, you've got to have clarity. The route to clarity is for the people to decide and give us the mandate. OK, we've seen 2.5 years, we've seen the deal the government comes out with. Do you really want to leave, or do you want to stay?
Jeremy Corbyn says we can't stop Brexit, and he doesn't go with the people's vote plan that you have.
Yeah, no, I'm afraid I disagree with them about that. And I also think, by the way, if the Labour Party were to lead this cause, if the Labour Party actually took a stand and said, you know, we're going to vote down this deal because it's a bad deal, if we can't get a general election, we should have a fresh vote. If the Labour Party led that charge, two things would happen. You'd have the vote, and the Labour Party would actually go up in the polls.
What do you say to those people who say, look, there's Tony Blair, former Prime Minister, a man of yesterday, now pushing an argument like this, and we've heard it from Nick Clegg. You both wrote to a German newspaper. What do you say to those who say, you two have been standing on the sidelines, as Theresa May has been playing, many would use the analogy, a game of poker. There are you at the side saying, well, you're not going to play that hand, are you? Or, oh, I think you've played your best card now, you're going to be in real trouble. You have in some ways undermined the very negotiations that she has been trying to carry out.
Yeah, but here's the thing. Look, it doesn't matter whether it's me or someone else. The problem is the hand that she's trying to negotiate, what she's trying to negotiate is unnegotiable. Right? What she wants is for Britain to retain the advantages of being part of the economic structures of Europe, right? To retain the advantages of being part of the single market, part of the customs union, in order to minimize that economic damage. But at the same time, in the nod to the Brexiteers, say, no, but we want to pursue our own rules and our own regulations. It can't be done. So it's not a question of undercutting her negotiating position. She has been pushed into a position, essentially, I think, by the divisions in the Conservative Party, where she's got incompatible negotiating objectives. She wants a frictionless border in Ireland. OK, you can have one. But by the way, you can only have one if Britain remains in the customs union and the single market for goods and agricultural products. Okay, but point number two, she's then been pushed into a commitment, we're going to leave the single market and the customs union. And then point number three, she's been pushed into a position where she says that Northern Ireland's got to remain in the same relationship with Europe as the rest of the UK. There is no way you can negotiate all those three objectives. And so look, I have stepped into this argument, not because I'm not sympathetic to her. I know how difficult the job is. It's a really difficult job, and she's been dealt a really difficult hand. But this is such an important decision for the country. You've got to get to the right place, and this is the wrong place. And I'm sorry, and I really, I wouldn't normally, step in when a Prime Minister's doing something as difficult as this. But this is not going to work.
But isn't Parliament the right place?
Yeah, Parliament is the right place. But if Parliament can't agree, look, if you said to those members of Parliament, leave aside, all the pressure from the whips and all the swirling debate around you and just decide what do you really think is the right thing to do, then I think members of Parliament would vote this deal down. So the question is really, in those circumstances, are you really going to push ahead with this when it's very, very difficult to see how you can possibly get a deal that truly satisfies Parliament?
I suspect you must meet lots of people on a daily basis who say, do you know what, politics and politicians have let us down. We made a very clear decision as a country in a referendum. It was a clear decision, and yet the politics has let us down on this.
Yeah, but here's the problem, I'm afraid. The decision was at one level obviously clear, but then there are different varieties of Brexit on offer, and they're very different in their implications and consequences. So at one level you can say, yeah, people have voted to leave, and I understand people say, look, you voted to leave, just get on with it. The problem is when you just get on with it, you find you're in this dilemma. Do you stay close to Europe to minimize the economic damage, in which case you're a rule taker and you've given up being a rule maker, bad idea, pointless, or do you break out of the European single market and customs union, in which case you're going to have a long process of adjustment, which is going to be very painful. And look, there's no fault here. That is the basic dilemma at the heart of the negotiation. It's why the negotiation's been so difficult. There is no way around it. You've got to choose. She's chosen essentially the pointless Brexit, but it's not a good deal for the country. And you shouldn't go ahead with it unless the people have said, OK, I really think that's the right thing to do.
So to those who would say, well, hang on, the decision was made, we are where we are, there is a deal on the table, or there's a no deal. Those are the two options. And then yesterday you have Angela Merkel and Emmanuel Macron saying, we need a European army, that's the future. What do you say to those people who say, aha, there you go, there's another reason why we should leave?
Right, first of all, let's just be clear. They're not saying a European army in the sense of one army for the whole of Europe. What they're saying is there should be greater defence cooperation in Europe because they're anxious about whether we can depend in all sets of circumstances on the United States, given the mood there. Okay, that's an argument that's been going on for a long time. By the way, Britain wants to remain part of that debate. This is a common thread even with this government, even if we do Brexit. But that's not the issue that's in front of us today. The issue that's in front of us is, does this deal that she's done, if it's as people anticipate, does it really, does it obey the mandate of the Brexit vote in circumstances where a large part of those most ardent about leaving say it doesn't, and where a large part of the population still says, look, we should be reconsidering this and staying. So this is the question, and you can go around it 1,000 different times, but that's where it comes back to all the time. And the problem is, this is an incredibly difficult negotiation. I don't diminish the difficulty of it at all. In fact, I emphasize it at every turn, but the deal that we've come out with is a deal that, as I said before, is actually not the best of a bad job, but the worst of both worlds.
Tony Blair, I'm most grateful for your time. Thank you very much for joining us here on BBC News.